Welcome to Boring Conversation, a Malifaux podcast.
Hey there, weirdos, and welcome to episode 1.5 of Boring Conversation, a Malifaux podcast. On this episode, I have a single guest. Adam will not be joining us this time. I'd like everybody to say hello to John Fox. Say hi, John.
Hey, what's going on?
So a lot of you can probably recognize John's voice from the Bayou Breakdown blog. As you'll see in this episode, he is also a purveyor of fine bacon and all bacony goods. And of course, you already know me, Jesse, the would-be podcaster and big fan of Try Hard Masters. So, to start things off, what am I drinking tonight? Well, I am drinking a Sazerac, which is a wonderful little cocktail made with rye, creole bitters, a little bit of sugar, and a lemon peel. Delightful little thing. John, are you drinking anything tonight?
I got a Guinness Stout, as always. It's the go-to.
Good. Yeah, for sure. Big fan of the Guinness Stout myself.
You know, it was very funny because my grandfather was a big Guinness drinker as well. And he finally got to make his way all the way over to Ireland. And he was very excited to try Guinness in Ireland. And he got to the bar. And all the old gaffers were drinking Budweiser. And he was just so disappointed. But they loved, like, foreign exotic beers. And it never, like... I guess it never clicked to him that Budweiser would be a foreign exotic beer in Ireland.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm very fortunate in that my homebrew setup. I actually just this year installed a nitro faucet on the kegerator in my kitchen. So the very first beer that I put onto it was an Irish style stout.
Ugh.
So having that on draft anytime I want was delightful.
If I ever hold up the glass and I can see through it, I don't drink it. It's just when it comes to beer, it's got to be dark and it's got to be like, you know, just perfect stout.
That's what I appreciate about you. All right, so John has agreed to join me today so that we can kind of springboard off of some of the conversation that Adam and I had in the last episode about Ulix. Adam kind of prompted me to talk about my growing relationship with Ulix and what I really enjoy about him as a master. It sparked a lot of conversation, especially in the Bayou chat, and kind of inspired me to play a few more games with Ulix over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, here we are. John's a big Ulix player. He's been playing him actually quite a bit longer than I have, and he has a very different take on the master and the keyword. So I kind of wanted to get us together. We could put our heads together, try and figure out what makes each other's Ulix crews tick, and maybe come out the other end with some new insights. So let's do this thing.
Yeah, man.
So I don't really want to make this into a deep dive, so to speak. There's already a deep dive on Ulix out, I believe, on the Third Floor Wars podcast. And there are plenty of crew deep dives out there in general. So I kind of wanted to just briefly overview the crew. John and I can kind of go over some of the ways that it ticks, what makes it work, what makes it unique in the faction. So the first thing that Ulix and the Sooey crew strike me as is one of action efficiency and AP trading, kind of like you see in a Zoraida crew, but with the AP trading spread out over more models. And when I say AP trading, I mean trading out a less valuable AP like Penelope, his totems, for a more valuable one, like with a War Pig or Old Major, using the Herdem action. So another piece of that, like I'd mentioned, was action efficiency. There are some ways that Ulix has to get essentially the effect of multiple AP out of one action, such as, for instance, using Herdem as a trigger off of a Grow Up Strong, which you use to grow the pig. You hit the trigger, you get a Herdem. You use the Herdem to make that pig or that pig walk. That pig walks, and then Ulix is close enough that he's able to hitch a ride. So in a sense, you're almost creating 3 maybe even a little more than 3 AP because of the push on grow up strong out of a single AP.
Yeah, that's absolutely a huge, I think, strength of this crew is that, like, you're never going to not have a kind of a flexibility of actions. Like, I don't think anybody has more than 2 actions really on the card except for Ulix, 2 or 3, but like the different levels of actions you can take or trade up, right? Like from a slop holler and a hog whisperer up to a war pig, like all of those. It's almost like a trickle up economy, right? Like starts with these tiny little models and then builds up to a war pig taking like 6, 7 actions in a turn, and that's what you
Right,
want.
and exactly, and anybody who's played an obey master like Zoraida, or well, I guess she's the only real obey master, but has played with obeys in the crew knows that trading less value AP for more valuable AP, or AP at distance, such as obeying a model, or in this case, herding a model that's 8 inches away, to allow them to then take an action outside the reach of your master or whatever model is acting. Or a great example would be taking an AP from an insignificant model, being Penelope the totem, and turning that into an interact on a model that's a good distance away. I mean, that can be something that a lot of folks may not necessarily expect. And when you're talking about a totem that's kind of hanging back and maybe not really involved in the scrum, to suddenly walk up and then obey something that's a grand total of 14 inches from where it started, to interact or do something that's going to score points, it can be kind of a big deal, kind of come out of left field for the opponent.
Do you know what's actually thinking about it instead of kind of comparing it to Zoraida? I think Ulix sort of compares a little bit more to Lucius. Without the card draw, obviously, that's a thing we're going to get into here. But a lot of the kind of the sort of like key components of the crew, I think, are very like similar in that moving actions around to different people. Like Zoraida has obeys, which I think are very important, but really, like, she's only really usually obeying a couple things, and then she has that sort of node to spread out. Whereas Lucius and Ulix are kind of from a center point pushing out their models and getting their models to move further to kind of like widen. So you start out in a bubble and then you sort of widen out to a larger branch of the board. So I really think that that's a better parallel is kind of like Lucius and Ulix.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good point. And speaking of the card, well, we'll get to the card draw in a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So, what other things do you feel really make Ulix unique or strong within the faction, John?
Like, Bayou's a fairly fast faction already, especially with Rooster Riders and the Emissary, but everything in his crew is just fast, right? Like, it's across the board in no time. Like, you've got almost, half of the keyword has Reckless. They get bonus speed from Penelope. You're hurting them to make them move, take walk actions. The slop hauler and Ulix can hitch a ride. Like, Gracie can ride with me people. So, like, the whole faction or the whole keyword is just staggeringly fast.
Yeah, that I think cannot be understated. I mean, you're talking, most of the pigs have either walk 5 or walk 6. I believe wild boars and war pigs are both walk 6. As you'd mentioned, if they start their activation within 6 inches of Penelope, they get +1 move for the duration of the activation, not just for any actions they take within that 6 inches. And Penelope can, from the shadows, to start maybe 5 or 6 inches up the board if the terrain is going to help protect her.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can take a model that's on the deployment line. Let's say we're in standard, just for the heck of it. You start out with like a squealer on the deployment line. You grow it to a war pig or a wild boar. That gives it a replace, and then it gives it a push, and then you give it a herd 'em to make it walk. And then when it eventually activates, if you haven't herded it again, it's still going to be within 6 inches of Penelope. Walk 7 with Reckless. Yeah,
Yeah.
They're pretty quick.
It's just nuts. It's just, if you think that war pig is not getting to you on turn 1, you're probably wrong unless you're playing like Raspy or something that blocks up the board, right? Like that's that's kind of a problem you have to deal with.
Foreshadowing about something we're going to talk about.
But yeah, like absolutely, the crew is just it's nuts fast. I think the other thing that really like is a standout for the crew is there's a trigger on every attack. You're forced to take triggers to some degree, but there's a trick like every suit does something for you, which is really nice.
Yeah, and that's specifically on the pigs. Basically, every pig has, most of them have a trigger on every suit. Some of them may be missing one suit or, one or two suits here or there. And like you said, some are good, some are bad. You might not always want them, but we have ways to hedge that bet and make sure we get the suits that we want. I mean, the other thing that it's really shown to be a big benefit in the last couple of games that I've played with him is the just unbelievable amount of healing that the crew has. I've never seen a crew that can heal like the Ulix crew can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking most of the models in the crew, most of the pigs in the crew have a tear off a bite trigger on a ram. The ram being an important point. A lot of them also have eat your fill, so when they kill a model, they heal too. Tear off a bite heals them too, just by resolving the trigger. And one of the things that you can do to help ensure those suits is, there is a way with Old Major, the henchman of the crew, that as long as your model has started their activation within 6 inches of him, that all of their attacks for that activation are going to gain a ram, and they're going to gain a positive flip to damage. So now all of a sudden you have a guaranteed tear off a bite on every attack that's coming out of your war pig that is already going to be stat 6, swinging at like a 3-4-6 damage track, and you're healing 2 every time you hit. It's tough to understate how much healing you can actually get.
Yeah, don't forget you've got Ulix who can heal, and you've got Slop Haulers who can heal. So, like, there's tons of healing. But that brings us to another part of it, is that they don't generally tend to have any other real defenses other than healing. So your models will definitely throughout the game play this like yo-yo effect on their hit points, which is fine as long as they don't get to 0. It's kind of like when I used to play Magic the Gathering. I played a stupid amount of time that I spent on that game. But one of my best friends, when we were playing, and you'd play and you'd be like, crap, I'm down to like three health. This is bad. Like I've only got 3 health left. And he'd be like, till you get to 0, it doesn't matter. Right. And it's kind of the same way with Ulix. As long as they're not at 0 wounds, they're still alive. So you can always heal them back up. They can always, jump back up. And with so many actions, that ram to their attacks is so important for a couple reasons. Number one, because even out of activation, you can heal them back up. And number 2, all the pigs must declare triggers. So that ram helps you control what triggers you have, because you don't want to, in the middle of your war pigs activation, hit the wrong trigger. Like if you have shove aside, and you don't need to shove aside, right? Like you don't need to push it away. Then a better example is Gracie. You don't want Gracie to lay down and take a nap on her first AP.
Right. And you don't necessarily want a war pig to rampage. That's a good one. Rampage, you're pushing 5 inches through the model. It could put you in a not so advantageous position.
Very bad
it could
spot.
Something else that you don't want to be in. And to your point, getting that guaranteed ram is a way to control that. It really helps take a lot of card pressure off of you when you already have a lot of card pressure, and you don't want to have to be cheating down just so that you don't hit triggers that are going to put you in a bad spot. So yeah, for sure. One of the other things that I think really makes the crew stand out is something that's probably kind of easy to miss, and that's their Demise Delicious Bacon trigger that they have on so many of the pigs. Basically, anytime a pig dies, instead of making a corpse marker, it can make a scheme marker. So, I mean, in GG1, individual scheme markers are maybe a little bit less valuable than they were in GG0. A lot of the scheming requires more model placement and a little bit less scheme marker placement. But still, I mean, being able to, put your pig way in the backfield, and then have your opponent kill it, only to see them, drop a scheme marker for, God forbid, runic binding.
Yeah, I
But
was
I
gonna
mean, we
say,
don't talk about runic binding.
look, this is the only crew I would consider runic binding.
Yeah, still not a strong pick, but it could do it. I suppose.
You forget that I am the mad scientist of Malifaux, and I will absolutely pigapult piglets across the board. Don't at me. Like, it's no problem for me to just throw piglets. Like, make a list where all the Sal does is just pop piglets out all day long and fling things. So
I can dig it. So yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the things that make the crew kind of strong. So, let's talk a little bit about the weaknesses, and then we can talk about where we feel like Ulix fits into Bayou. Because we've got a bunch of great masters, so I really want to know what makes you pick him over other masters in our stable.
Well, so number one, the hardest thing about Ulix is that he is everything in the crew. Almost every action in the crew, all of this flexibility we're talking about requires sevens, 5, 6, 7s, right? It all requires a card. Ulix's defense trigger or defense for protected requires a card. His ability to heal pigs as a healer is a damage prevention. I can't remember what's top.
It's damage prevention.
Requires a card. So all of these abilities to help kind of keep your crew up and to get you to do what you do requires cards, and yet there's no card draw in the keyword natively. Like, it just doesn't exist.
There is some, but it's corner case. It's difficult to get off.
And so it's so hard to keep the hand. Like, when you look at an Ulix hand, when you're playing Ulix and you look at your hand, like, you have to look and decide which cards are worth giving up, because probably 5 to 6 activations in, you're going to be down 3 or 4 cards. It's just going to happen. Like you're not going to keep cards in your hand, and that can be really bad. Like, if you're facing an execute crew, right? Like, that's the last thing you want to see is Jackdaw across the side of the board. Like, that's a nightmare for Ulix, right? Or to some degree, like Sonya, who has a lot of discard abilities and that sort of thing. Like, the cards in your hand are so much more important to Ulix than a lot of other crews.
Yeah, I mean, to your point with Sonya, like, all the counter spells in the crew, a lot of times counterspell is like, it's kind of annoying, but it's not the end of the world.
When it's on Gracie,
Ulix's crew lives on their triggers. If they're denied triggers, their action efficiency and their damage output and their healing all go basically to 0.
Well,
it's bad.
Not just that, but like, I've played against a game where I played Gracie. I don't think I was playing Ulix specifically, but I was playing Gracie. And my opponent brought, of course, magical training on minor, dropped it right in front of Gracie, and now Gracie can't get away. But if Gracie attacks that minor because it's got a counter spell and she has to declare a trigger, that forces me to discard a card because I have to declare a trigger. So now I'm just ditching cards out of my hand. So counterspell is a lot worse than it seems like it is at first.
Yeah. And, to your point before, when you were talking about looking at your hand and, assessing its value and trying to figure out what you need the cards for, this is kind of a bigger conversation, but that is such a strength of really high level Malifaux players. Somebody who can pick up their hand first turn, pick up their hand second turn, look at the cards in it, and immediately realize, okay, I need this card for this card for this one for this. and realizing when they need to stone and when they don't. So one thing that I did was I played a game of Ulix versus Tara the other day, and the game went very well for me. I don't need to go into all the details there, but the first turn I drew what I consider to be basically the perfect Ulix hand. Now it was a very good hand. I didn't have to stone. I got very fortunate, but I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, just because it goes to show how important his hand is in making sure that his abilities actually go off. So I had from lowest to highest, I had a 6 mask. So a 6 is going to be a Herdum from Ulix. Great. That's the big one. I got a 7 ram. 7 ram means that that's going to be a summon from a Slop Hauler or a Hog Whisperer. I had a Slop Hauler that game. They need a ram and they need at least a 6. They can't get the suit any other way. So I drew into that. Great. I had an 8 ram, so another possible summon, or the 8 is enough to grow a pig 1 generation. So piglet to squealer, squealer to wild boar, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I drew a 10 tome. That's important because that's a 1 generation grow with Ulix with the built-in trigger for a Herdum attempt.
Correct.
So that's kind of a big deal. I also drew an 11 tome, which you can use that for a variety of things. There's a bunch of reasons that you might want it. You'd probably use that for like an attack or something on a war pig. And then I drew a 12. So the 12 is enough to grow a pig 2 generations. So squealer or war pig is the big one. So basically, you look at that hand and you realize, wow, that's a really good hand. Great. Every single one of those cards is budgeted for something.
Yep.
There was literally one card that I was like, okay, well, I could probably use this for an attack. No. I used all of those cards to hit different TNs that first turn, aside from I think I flipped the 12 that I needed to grow a pig 2 generation, so I didn't have to cheat the 12 ram from my hand. And I used the 11 for an attack. But the 8, the 6, the 7, and the 10 all got used to hit TNs. I had no cards left for protected. I had no cards left for sturdy critters. I had no cards free for nudge 'em from Old Major, all of which require discards.
Yep.
Right.
And that is the frustration. Like that right there is the it's all of these layers that build up that make Ulix there's a level where Ulix does everything that a top level support master, I guess maybe is what we're trying to is maybe the category we put him in. He does everything that you want him to do, right? Except that's where that whole the whole ladder that you've built kind of topples mid game. And it always the first turn, I always feel like my first Ulix turn, my second Ulix turn are super strong. Then the third Ulix turn, because let's face it, sometimes you got to keep your war pig safe, or you got to keep Old Major safe, so you're gonna have to dump a card, cheat a card to keep it alive. And then suddenly you start, oh well crap, that's a card I needed to do this, and that's something I need. So it all starts to wear down, I think, about mid game when you interact with the opponent, right? When you start actually really clashing with the opponent, suddenly those decisions about where you spend your cards become so much more important.
Yeah, and it really is kind of like a house of cards. If everything is stable and you're flipping the cards that you need and you're not having to cheat too much from your hand just to hit the TNs, then Ulix is like a freaking 11. He can do such bananas stuff, but if you have basically a bad first turn, bad second turn, where you're not hitting your TNs, you're having to cheat cards from your hand, the whole crew can start to crumble.
Yep.
Because you just don't have the cards that you need to do other things. I mean, that moment when you're trying to hit a Herdum on Ulix and you only need a 6 for it, and you end up having to cheat a 10 to get it off, that's a real feel-bad moment for the Ulix.
It is.
Yeah,
for
real.
And that's, and that's, I guess, part of the, and we can kind of get to that when we talk about, how do we want to, what would we do to kind of help Ulix along? We can talk about that too. But the other issue I think Ulix runs into is kind of like Euripides. There's a lot of big butts in the crew, right?
Yeah.
You've got 40 mil bases, you've got 50 mil bases, you've got like a lot of big models, and they get in the way, right? Like,
Yeah.
and especially because Malifaux is a third edition Malifaux has kind of a mini game in it, which is how many terrain markers can you drop on the board in a single game. Like anybody who's played a Zip versus Karis game, like markers everywhere, like literally just across the board. So with Rasputina, right? Like I played Ulix versus Rasputina with my buddy Dave a couple weeks ago. It was a nightmare because I had this idea for Ulix, so I didn't bring any marker removal. And he just, like, the first turn, he dropped enough markers to hold up my War Pig for a turn, and I wasn't able to get to his Mech Rider. And so his Mech Rider just ran rampant around the table, and I wasn't able to do anything about it because I needed to be able to hit it turn one. And marker, those markers are enough, man.
Yeah, I mean, at least with Euripides, he's in even a better position than Ulix is because, like, his totem can make one model incorporeal. He's got a couple of models. I believe he has at least 2 models that can teleport to ice pillar markers. So he can like make an ice pillar, teleport to it. You can skip over a bunch of other models, skip over terrain markers, that kind of thing. Ulix doesn't have any of that.
Nope.
It's literally
walks.
It's walks.
Yeah.
Literally just walks. There's no pushes. There's no marker removal unless you out of keyworded in. I have out of keyworded in pair in one game against Raspy, which did help, but it didn't. It certainly did not alleviate the issue. The emissary can help a little bit, but he's a lot of points, and the Ulix crew, as we'll probably talk about, doesn't have a ton of points to throw around. Yeah. Markers and excessive terrain can be a real problem for the crew.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the Raspy thing, blasts and shockwaves can be a real problem for the crew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. I've thought about this and I've thought about this. This is a conversation because in general, it feels like Bayou kind of has an issue with blasts and shockwaves to begin with. We have a lot of bubbly style, kind of crews. And, I played a Sonya versus Sommer game this week, and I was like, this should be a terrible matchup for Sommer. Like, dear God, everything's... But I think that if you are really good at your positioning and eyeballing exactly how much, space you have between models, you can avoid some of the blast shockwaves a little better than you think you can, right? Because at first when you look at it, you're like, oh, this is effed. I'm in trouble here. But I think activation control is a big deal. So, right, and that's one thing Ulix can do really well is sort of like, just bring out tons of activations. So, if you can kind of control when the shockwaves come, when the blasts come, and also control your positioning on those things, it's not a death sentence by any means, but it is something you have to learn how to play around. And that's probably like, we talk about first level, second level. There's probably like a third level Malifaux skill. Like it's something, that I'm just now like starting to really wrap my head around. And I've been playing third edition now for what, like two and a half years, right? Like, cause I played all through the beta. So, it's one of those things where it's like, when you see a blast, when you see shockwaves and you're like, man, and it's something to think about because, if you haven't looked at the Explorer's book yet, they got a lot of blasts, a lot of shockwaves, and none of
A
the
lot of shockwaves.
none of those shockwaves have projectiles on them, so you can't just tie them up.
And that's a very good point about the making sure you give you manage your spacing. It seems like that would be very first level, but it's actually a lot more difficult in practice to pull off. And another thing and this is another reason that I feel like Ulix is particularly vulnerable to him, is that the way his crew works, it's very bubbly, and it's not like one 6-inch bubble that you're kind of working around. The crew really works the best when you have multiple overlapping bubbles, because you want the bubble from Old Major, you also want the bubble from Ulix, potentially the bubble from Hog Whisperer if you took them, and trying to manage getting those two bubbles overlapped, or usually two bubbles overlapped, and in range of the models that you need them to be in range with, especially with all the 50 mil bases, it makes it pretty tough to manage, especially shockwaves. Like if somebody comes at you with shockwave 2 stuff, like I would never in a million freaking years want to play against something that could drop a bunch of 2-inch shockwaves
I agree.
with Ulix.
I agree, and I look at
it'd be terrifying.
and I look at like and also too, because Hitch a Ride is base to base, so
Right.
Ulix is always going to be right there on Old Major, which is frustrating. But he's always going to be side by side.
Yep. And the Slot Poller has Hitch a Ride too, and
Mhm.
the Slot Poller has no defensive tech whatsoever
No, they
to
die.
deal with
They're
blast
squished.
impulses. They just die.
Yeah.
They die. Yeah.
They're super squish. But, kind of a sidetrack for just Bayou players in general. Slot Poller is actually a really good out of keyword take. And that seems weird, but one of our best boys, First Mate, he's beast. He heals beasts, right? Like he can hurt.
That's true.
He can hitch a ride on the First Mate. He can hitch a ride with Gracie. Like Gracie and First Mate are two of our big boys, and Slop Holler does a lot of work for them. At what, like 6 points out of keyword? Like that's not a bad for a support piece.
No, not at all.
So he's kind of like a budget Bokor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. So, I mean, the other thing, and I don't need to go too far into this because it's pretty obvious on its face, but the crew also has very low willpower across the board. So Old Major's a 6, Gracie's a 6. Most of the other big stuff is 4. A couple of 5s in there. So very, very vulnerable to willpower attacks. I would be very afraid to play a Ulix crew into, I mean, just declaring them into Neverborn in general is kind of a sketchy situation, because they've got Dreamer, they've got Pandora, they've got Zoraida. Like those are not masters that I want to be playing into with Ulix. Rezzers can be a real problem. I mean, the list goes on. I don't need to go through all of the factions that I would struggle with. But yeah, any faction where I feel like the master that's going to come into play in the pool is going to attack willpower is going to be a big problem. We have ways to work around terrifying, but stuff that actually attacks our willpower, not so good.
Caveat there: if you think the Neverborn player is going to bring Hinamatsu, like if you can kind of sniff out Hinamatsu, we have Ulix has really the best armor mitigation chances of anybody in Bayou, which is a problem for Bayou on the whole.
Yeah.
So that armor 2 on Hinamatsu and Vasilisa, a War Pig takes them down real quick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you draw that low tome and you use the AP to do a nudge 'em with Old Major on the War Pig to give them tomes for every attack that turn, oof, man, nasty. Auto armor piercing on a 3-4-6 damage track. Bad news.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Especially for Bayou, who the faction's biggest issue is armor right now. Like it's awful. Like any crew that has just that ability to stand up to Bayou for a turn longer than we need them to.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I haven't actually run into it, but I can definitely seeing it as being a major problem is anything that has ready ability to turn off healing. So like playing into Levy with the
Mm-hmm.
Withering Away auras on Abominations and Marlena Webster would be a problem. Playing into 10 Thunders in general, because Yorigumo are so goddamn good,
Yeah.
and they have Mark of Vengeance to turn off
Mhm.
healing at range. It's filthy.
And
And if you
didn't Explorers get a model, I think, that turns off healing?
I'm sure they did. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge
Yeah.
of the
I
Explorer stuff yet, but I would not be surprised because they got a lot of cool stuff.
yeah, pretty sure I remember seeing it.
But yeah, I mean, so the reason that turning off healing is such a big deal, and we've talked about that a little bit before, or previously. You can take a war pig. Let's say the war pig gets beat up a little bit, knocked down to like 2-3 wounds, down from its full 10. Most opponents would say, "Oh well, I got that thing dead to rights. Like I'm going to be able to kill it in one activation." If you have, and this kind of gets into what I consider second level Ulix play, you want your big hitters, your war pigs, especially, and your wild boars, if you have them out on the table, you want them to take some hits before they activate. You want your opponent to try and kill them and knock all of those 10 wounds off. And then you want to activate them, swing 3 times, healing 2 each time, and probably killing a model and healing another 2. And then if they're not full, then Ulix or a Slop Hauler is going to activate and heal them up. I played a game against Karis at the last tournament, where I had one war pig that I hired at the start of the game with inferiority complex. It got knocked down to 2 or 3 wounds, I think 3 times that game, and healed up to full every time. And at the end of the game, it was still alive and had burning 15 on it, and I was not concerned about it dying.
Yep.
Uh, the amount of healing that the crew can get is truly mind-boggling. So if something can turn that healing off, your war pig is going to die.
It's a true story. That's all they
Yeah.
got. That's it. That's what they have. They have healing.
Yeah.
And that's
They are defense 5, willpower 4, no defensive tech whatsoever. That's all I got.
didn't even get hard to wound. Nothing.
Nope.
Nothing.
Nope.
Nothing.
10 wounds. That's all I got. So usually, in most situations, a player would look at a model and say, okay, well, yeah, it's 10 wounds. That's a lot. It's only defense 5, willpower 4 with nothing else. That thing is going to die so easily. And you're right. If you let your opponent get 2 or 3 activations into it, it's going to die. And that's where that activation order that John had mentioned before, I think, really comes into play. And this is something that I think is a skill that a lot of players need to learn in Malifaux in general, and is not specific to Ulix. But I think Ulix really highlights that skill.
Yeah. And that's something we didn't, that's something that, especially if you're coming from another war game where it's I go, you go, like, War Machine or something like that. That's something that you don't have to think about. So it's not a very intuitive skill, right? Like it's something that is, it's most of the newer war games we're seeing that, like we're seeing alternating activations. But it is a skill that you kind of have to develop. And I think that people that have played second edition for a long time and now third edition kind of have a little advantage there where they're able to think. And people who play Guild Ball, like Guild Ball is absolutely all about the order of activations is super important in that game. So anybody coming from there, like you kind of understand, how you can manipulate that as a resource.
Yeah, and a resource. That's a very good point. So that most of the time, let's say you're playing another crew and you've got your big hitter, it's the start of turn 2, start of turn 3, you've got a model you really need to kill. Sometimes taking that full health war pig and activating first to try and kill that model, even if you successfully kill it, but now the war pig is done with its activation and in a vulnerable position, you've just lost that war pig.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily the way that it pans out in a lot of other crews, because most other big hitter models also have some kind of defensive tech. More often than not, you really need to let your opponent activate, swing on the war pig, deal a bunch of damage to it, and then take that War Pig's activation on number 2, number 3. Otherwise, you're just going to end up losing the
Right.
thing.
Penelope, just having Penelope go first, herd the War Pig, punch it, get it back up to full, herd another thing to do, to get her move where it needs to be. Like that's a solid, 2 obeys basically in a turn. It's fine.
And it's just not the way that a lot of other crews play. So I think on face, a lot of people would just, say, oh, well, I need to kill Hinamatsu or, whatever it is. I'm just going to activate the War Pig first.
Yeah.
They use it, it dies, and then they're like, oh, shit, now I'm out my fucking 9-stone model.
But now, if your War Pig is at like 4 wounds and it's facing down something big, activating it early, get the extra tomes, heal back up to full, kill the model. That's good because then you could possibly use the Herdums to pull it out of the way, get it, just like, yeah.
Exactly. So, I guess, the other thing that you'd mentioned briefly is that the crew really doesn't have very much access to card draw. It really only has 2 models that can draw cards. Ulix on his melee attack, which I can count on one hand the number of times that I've used Ulix's melee attack.
I can't.
Like, it almost never freaking happens.
I can't think I ever have. I really can't.
I used it once in my last game, and it's just because it was the only way I was going to be able to kill Johan before his regen kicked in. Never happens. And then Old Major can do it on his bonus action on a trigger. I think he can get Surge. But that's it.
Yeah.
There's none. And Bayou does not have very much out of keyword card draw that they can bring in. It's one of the weaknesses of the faction.
Bokor. But with the And honestly, the more I play, the more I think Bokor is probably the way to go because you can stampede the Bokor for Hard Knock Life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he heals everything back up. And he's got the Hard Knock Life to get the. Is it good for a laugh? It's not good for a laugh, is it?
Deja vu.
Yeah.
Discard one card, draw 2.
So, like the amount of value in that ability is pretty huge. Plus, you get another access to obey, which and shielded.
Shielded's a big deal because shielded can help you mitigate your stampede damage.
So really, that's kind of been a big hire for me is bringing that one Bokor into the crew. It's 7 points, but it's probably one of the best 7 points you can spend in the faction. That
gets into a whole other conversation. Bokors are probably a faction MVP.
They're a boss. Yeah.
But my only concern with Bokors, and now to be fair, I've only tried a Bokor once with Ulix, so maybe you have more experience with this. My issue with the Bokors is that they're another TN7.
Yep.
And they do give you the card draw, but
still a 7.
Yeah. It's still a 7, and if you're activating with them and trying to get 2 or even 3 heals off, that's 3 7s. Those 3 7s are 3 Herdums.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So they might draw you some cards. Absolutely. No question about it. You're usually... you can kind of counterpoint me here, but I can't imagine that you're getting more than 1 or maybe 2 glowy on them a turn, right?
No.
So you can probably guarantee 1 deja vu. And then by guaranteeing a deja vu, you're not necessarily able to guarantee an obey.
Yeah, I agree. It is trouble. The other thing you have to worry about with the Bokor is they don't get to hitch a ride. They get left behind unless Gracie is towing them along, and you would think as good as Gracie is outside of the keyword, Gracie would be an auto pick every time in Ulix, but I find that I take her less in Ulix than I do outside of Ulix.
That's interesting because I tend to take her a lot in Ulix, so we'll talk about that shortly here.
Yeah. So like the other option to counteract card draw is, and it kind of runs into the same problem as the Bokor, the effigy. But once again, to buy you 2 card off the top. But once again, it's a 3-inch aura. He gets left behind. and you can't hurt them on the effigy. So you can't pull the effigy up, which is, the issue. If you allow second masters, I guess you could bring Zoraida. But once again, that eats a lot of points out of your crew. Like, that's...
Yeah, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I can't really think of any good, like... And that's the problem, is that there's no really, like, non-resource intensive card draw that you have access to.
Right. So, I mean, that kind of sums up Ulix's strengths and weaknesses. So, where does he fit in the faction for you? When do you reach for him?
When there's a corner deployment and everything in the pool, at least 2 or 3 parts of the pool require me to get markers way across the board.
All right, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of where I go for Ulix, is like, when I see a pool that's like got 3 marker schemes in it, and it's like I can just just litter the board with bacon corpses. All right, that's where we go.
And this is kind of interesting, because this is going to highlight a big difference in the way that John and I play Ulix, because John, it seems like you play kind of a schemy Ulix, using a lot of small activations, dropping markers with corpses, dropping markers with obeys, getting them far across the table. And the way that I've been playing Ulix is quite a bit different. I've been playing him as kind of a bully, capitalizing all the herdums, taking big models, hiring in a couple of war pigs, basically focusing on beating and healing rather than deep scheming.
Mhm.
So I know that in the past you've talked about some success that you'd had with taking a bunch of squealers with Old Major, playing like kind of like a Ulixy gun line, but it seems like maybe you've moved on to a different style of crew. So how have you been playing him lately?
Lately I've just been like, I did try your war pigs, and I tried it against Raspy, so it didn't work.
Yeah, it wouldn't work.
But
It wouldn't work there.
But I value squealers very, very highly. Mainly because it's very easy if you need to turn them into a war pig. You've got that point there, and they're a good start point, because like, I value wild boars really well too, especially if the board requires that unimpeded or the impeded or unimpeded. Too many Guinnesses. The unimpeded, for war pig or wild boars. Wild boars are really good for that, right? Like, just being able to get where other pigs can't go. So Squealer is a great start point for me, because it's got a range attack, so you can kind of break some stuff down before it gets there, and then when something does get there, it's like, boom, war pig. Now you're facing down a war pig. Sorry, like, this isn't a squealer. But to complement that, I am big on piglets. Piglets are, if test subjects didn't exist, I would say piglets were our best 4-point model in the faction. Like, they're just insane, man. They get, with Penelope, they can get 18 inches up the board pretty easy and still drop a scheme marker. Like, so good. So I tend to like start with squealers as kind of like maybe 2 squealers to kind of like grow into the bigger guys that I need. And then I sort of like spend the first turn kind of like getting my piglet engine out, so that I can like spring piglets out. And the best thing about piglets is they're either going to get to where you want to go and drop marker themselves, or they're going to get to where you want them to go and your opponent's going to kill them and they drop the marker anyway. So you can't lose if a piglet is your scheme runner.
Right. So, I mean, talking about scheme markers and stuff, that's something I talked about briefly before. I don't feel like there are as many schemes in GG1 that benefit mass marker drops, or marker drops really, really deep. So how do you feel like Ulix fits into that? Like, when have you gotten real value out of him?
I would say that he definitely dropped value between GG0 and GG1. GG0, you had and now I'm going to lose all the names of things. But you had the one. What was the one across the middle line in GG0?
Harness the ley
Harness
line.
the ley lines. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was harness the ley line, search the ruins. They still had breakthrough, of course. That's in still. Wasn't there detonate the charges? Oh yeah, detonate charges. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That would have been great for Ulix. Yeah. So basically, we had detonate the charges, harness the ley line, search the ruins. Those were the big ones.
And they were so good.
And dig graves, dig their graves.
Yeah, dig graves was great too. So there were so many abilities for him to like need markers everywhere, and there wasn't as much ability of like marker plus model. So in GG1, I really like it for leave your mark, because late game, like that turn 4, drop 3 markers within range, like your opponent's not gonna stop it by killing your models, right?
Right, and conversely, you can kill your own models to drop markers within the 4 inches.
Exactly. Breakthrough, we've already talked about how fast the crew is. So, like, just slamming piglets into the backfield and being like, every piglet you kill just adds to my win. So please. Sabotage is the same way. Like, if you run a piglet out to, like 3 pieces of terrain near them and they just die, like you kill them or they get killed by whatever, it's really funny to put sabotage on a hazardous piece of terrain near the opponent's deployment zone with a piglet.
Yeah, for sure. Sabotage is kind of an unusual one because, like, they can deny it just by being near the terrain marker or by being near the terrain piece. But to your point, like, you have so much AP and so much marker dropping potential that it's one of the crews that you can actually kind of fake out sabotage or drop sabotage markers near multiple pieces of terrain without an enormous amount of AP invested into it. Like, you would not be able to do that in most crews. Usually it's like you get there, you drop your 1 marker, and that's it.
Yeah. And usually by the time you score it the first time, the rest of your crew is tied up their crew. So they have a lot harder time getting back to, kind of backtracking to, oh shit, now I got to stop this point. So a lot of times, like, that extra point tends to get through. If you score the first one, usually you're going to score the second one, unless they're really, really good at breaking away. And, which can happen. But Ulix is also really good at, like, just gumming up the works too.
For sure.
So yeah, I definitely like leave your mark. I definitely like breakthrough. I kind of like taking sabotage with him. I really wish we still had outflank or power ritual. Power ritual was another one. Power ritual is so good for GG0 for Ulix. Like, just barrel towards the ends of the earth and be like, yeah, okay. If you stop me, I'm just going to make another piglet who's going to do the same thing, right? Like 18 inches a turn. What are you going to do? You're not going to stop it. So I'm really hoping GG2 we see some, like, benefits to Ulix where I will want to play him a little more than I do now. My way, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, your way. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we've kind of I've talked a lot about this, but my way of playing Ulix has been a very, very highly aggressive bully list, where I'm hiring, 1 or sometimes even 2 war pigs with the inferiority complex upgrade. So that's 11 stones a piece. And then I'm growing a 3rd war pig on turn 1 because I'm almost always hiring a squealer. That way, if I draw 12 in my opening hand, I can have a 3rd war pig on the table right away. Sometimes instead of that 2nd war pig, I'm taking Gracie if I need more of like an anchor model, something for like claim jump or something to hold a midfield objective. And then I've tried a more traditional Ulix list with like hiring in some piglets, summoning in some piglets, growing stuff up incrementally, and I found that it just required, for my style of play, too many cards. I mean, I'm talking like, if I start with a piglet, I need an 8 and a 12 to grow it to a war pig if I'm even trying to do that, or I need a 12 just to grow it to a wild boar.
Yeah.
I don't really see growing a piglet to a squealer as being that valuable for that 8. Like, squealers are good, but an 8 to get to 1 is kind of a lot,
Agreed.
in my opinion.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I tried that. I tried doing the whole summoning thing with the sow and slop haulers and hog whisperers. The slop haulers and hog whisperers are tricky because they need a scheme or a corpse marker within, I think, 2 or 3 inches, and they need a 6 of rams, which they have no way to guarantee. So that's a fairly AP and resource intensive ability.
The Hog Whisperer, I think, is better for that because the tools for the job.
Well, yeah. The Hog Whisperer has tools for the job, which is good, and that comes down to an activation order thing. Sometimes you get lucky with the activation order, and you can use them when you're going to be able to draw one of those, and sometimes not. So, I mean, it's somewhat more reliable than a slop hauler, but not, in my opinion, drastically so.
Right.
And I mean, the sow can definitely, pump out some piglets. I mean, we're talking, conceivably 3 piglets in one turn if she recklesses, but every one of them is going to need a 6. If you have a scheme marker within 3 inches, then you don't need the crow on the 6. Otherwise, you do. So you're talking, 3 6s, potentially 3 6s of crows. And then the other thing that bums me out about the summoning thing, especially if you're not taking like a pigapult, like you talked about before, is the piglets get summoned in as mindless, so they don't even get to activate that turn. So I feel like it's a lot of AP in dropping scheme markers, a lot of resources in getting the 6s of crows or rams that you need, and then you get a model on the table, usually, before you even get up to the midline of the table, so it's kind of far back, that can't activate that turn. So I feel like it's a lot of AP and resources for not as much return as I'd like to see.
I agree. Which is, once again, like you just said, though, that's where the pigapult kind of comes into play, and it's not something you see normally in a crew for Ulix, but being able to take a mindless piglet and launch it, and it's going to take a point of damage. Boo-hoo, right? Like, you don't care if it dies. So being able to launch, the 2 piglets you've summoned this turn clear across the board to set up for your next, your next turn is, I mean,
Yeah. And if you view it as launching scheme markers instead of launching piglets, then it kind of reframes that thought process a little bit. But yeah, so I mean that's the issue that I've had with the summoning and growing style of crew. I mean, the last game that I played with Ulix with the bully list, my opponent said to me, and this is an opponent that's played me many, many, many times. And to be fair, I was really flipping hot. I had that hot hand the first turn. Like it was a good Ulix game,
right.
by all means. He told me, I have never seen a crew do what your crew just did. And I mean, I think that really speaks to the games that Ulix can play at 11. Like the bullshit that he can pull off with any style of crew. Never mind the bully style list that I'm doing. It's kind of staggering, I think, for some opponents to try to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and it's that flexibility, right? It's that ability. The one thing, he has with the Herdums and stuff is that, the game isn't going this way. Like, if I'm playing my game and my style game, and I really am having trouble getting through their models to get my points down, then I can just grow up a squealer and charge a squealer in, and suddenly I'm playing aggro in a game that I wasn't really playing super aggro in. So, and you can have in second edition, there was this Ulix really only had one way to play. It was kind of that bacon ball, like where you would basically build up to a big pig and just missile it out of the ball, right? And it's part of the reason why I think Ulix wasn't very good in second edition, was because he just had that's all he did was just missile out pigs. But you can still revert back to that play style when you need to, and in its niche, that's a great way to play, right? Because you're just I'm always going to have a backup beater. I'm always going to be able to just make a beater and send that beater out to punch you in the face. which is, I think, a big strength of Ulix. Like that's kind of where I feel like he kind of fits in Bayou, is that Bayou has a tendency to be very, glass cannon is not the word, but if you survive what the Bayou players are trying to do, then Bayou often has trouble with attrition. So
Definitely.
Ulix kind of helps win that, because like, oh, you killed my war pig. Crap, I'll just grow another war pig. And suddenly it's like your opponent's just beating through these wall of pigs trying to get to you.
Yeah, and getting back to that whole healing thing, I mean, just the look on your opponent's face when they feel like they have a war pig dead to rights, and then it heals almost to full or too full.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing sweeter.
Not even on its activation either. Like on a separate activation. That's where the strength is like, a war pig healing to full, like Blessed of December does that, right? Like you have other models that can do that. But to be able to do it, and it's not even that model still hasn't gone. So even if you attack it again, it's going to go and it's going to do it again. Like it's and once again, that's Ulix's magical Christmas land, right? Like that's when Ulix is playing well. When Ulix is struggling, it's a hard game, right? Like it's demoralizing when you're just like,
yeah, for sure.
Man, when you draw that, the one thing I do think that I like though is that like when I draw an average hand with Ulix and I don't get the big grow target, right? My hand's full of 6s, 7s, maybe a couple like weeks. It's still a valuable hand.
Right. Yeah, and he can use every single card.
And that is really good. So that is, one way to look at it, to be able to like, kind of like bring your thought process back to like the positives of it. But at the same time, man, it just like when something can eat your hand up, when you make the wrong play and Jack Daw shows up, like you're crying, right? Like,
yeah. I think that Ulix might be one of the crews that Yoko actually does really, really well into.
Right. Like I think Oliver said it best the other day on Swamp Fiends when he was like, some days, some games, you just would rather just be like, cool, you win, and go get a beer, right? Like this is just not going to be a great game.
Ulix has those games. He's either at like a 3 or he's at an 11,
Right.
and there's really not a whole lot of middle ground.
Like, man, I was thinking about like, because you were talking about how he doesn't play well in a Neverborn, and I was like, yeah, okay, so Pandora really hurts him. The low willpower means that Dreamer's just going to tie him up. And then I was like, and Nekema, God, like all that 0-inch melee, Nekema is just going to eat him alive. Like it's just going to back and forth, yo-yo back and forth, black blood, heal, black blood, heal, black blood. Like I don't like that game.
No, yeah, for sure. And the black blood is kind of that's one of the things that kind of I think would break the back of the healing engine, because the war pigs would be, or any of the pigs really, would be dealing more damage to themselves than they could reasonably be expected to heal.
Agreed.
I mean, yeah,
it's tough. It's tough.
It's a bad match. That'd be a bad match.
And really, that's where Ulix kind of sits out right now. It's like when you want to, if you want to talk about kind of tearing him out, is that there are some bad matchups for him, and I think you do kind of play a little bit of roulette, like putting him into specific games.
So I mean, let's theoretically say your top table at a tournament, round 5. So it's a 2-day tournament, big investment. What are the chances that you put Ulix on the table? It's tough.
It's tough. You know what I will say though, because I'm that guy. If I look, like if I've kind of can size up my opponent, or if I know my opponent and they don't necessarily know Ulix, and I do look and I see all of those schemes that I really like for Ulix, and I see corner deployment, and I'm just like, maybe, right? Like maybe neverborn. Like unless I look at their tray and Hinamatsu is glaring me in the face and it's like neck deep in puppets. Maybe, right? Like because that's a good matchup. But yeah, I just
Yeah, it's
so
tough. I
hard.
mean,
It's so hard.
he's not. Yeah, he's not Ma. He's not Summer. He's not Ophelia. Well, some people disagree with me on the Ophelia thing, but he's very niche. But I feel like he's got enough dark horse
Right, I agree.
in him that you can really come at somebody sideways if they don't know how to deal with him, because he does not play in any way, shape, or form like any other Bayou crew.
Correct. And I think I think that level of speed can just shock people. A freaking war pig down the board, turn one, and just
I mean, if somebody's
just eating things alive.
If it's a speed pool and somebody's expecting you to play Zip and you drop Ulix, they're going to be in for a very different game than they expected.
But now let me ask you a question: in a pool where, or in a say you're playing Wedge, and they're playing a highly aggressive master as well. When you're playing your war pigs, like, is that bad for you? Because I feel like, yes, your war pigs are going to get in, but I feel like they're going to get to the meat of your crew a lot easier too.
It's funny. So this just goes to my play style. So if I see Wedge, I'm almost always going to deploy as if it were standard. I will almost never deploy any further up than 8 or 9 inches on the board. It's just too dangerous. I feel like it puts you in too much of a bad position to get alpha'd or to overextend. Most of the time, if it's a Wedge game, I'm going to deploy way back and I'm going to play my game as standard. And then my opponent is, I find, more likely to overextend. And then that puts me in a good position to strike turn one, especially in Ulix crew with the amount of speed that they bring to the table. I feel like Wedge deployment in general is a trap.
And one day, your opponents are not going to fall for that trap. It's not soon. It's not today. It's not tomorrow. But one day there will be a game I play Wedge and I see somebody not like. Because even when I play like boss crews, I don't deploy up top and out. I use it to deploy outside of the wedge, right? Like further back, but outside of the wedge. So like from the shadows, like, you're not going to stick Penelope 6 inches outside of the point, right? Like that's insane. That'd put her over that'd put her over the center line, and that's a bad place for her to be. But pointing her, 3 inches out from the side is really good, because then you have kind of a way to like, an angle to sort of push through.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually how I deploy her. Is I'll basically deploy her in such a way that it prevents her from having to walk turn one. So she'll be like 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches outside of the deployment zone. Usually she's about 4 inches out, because I want to make sure that her +1 move bubble is going to hit all of my pigs. And I want to make sure that she's not stuck behind them.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I love that little move trigger, like on her hurt 'em. That helps so much when you can hit it and just be like, here she goes. Yeah. She's moving on up.
So as far as kind of wrapping things up a little bit, so I want to talk about models we love and models we wish we could love. So models that we love, I've talked about War Pigs enough. I don't need to go over them again. I feel like they're freaking amazing, and I've even taken them out of keyword in some situations before. They've never disappointed me. You said you didn't really care for Gracie so much in Ulix. I'm kind of the opposite way. I love Gracie in Ulix. I feel like the guaranteed rams from Old Major, plus the potential to get all the healing from Ulix and from the Slop Hauler, really turns that armor up like to ridiculous levels. And sometimes you need an anchor instead of something that's really squishy. So I've gotten really good mileage out of Gracie with Ulix.
I mean, I guess I like her when you need claim jump, when you need a model to just sit and stay. right? Like,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, I'll take her in claim jump. I'll take her in symbols. Times that I need area control. She's great at her area control.
what I think has happened is that my general meta, especially North Carolina meta, I've been playing Gracie as sort of a Bayou crutch for so long that they know what to do with her. So I've put less value in her because she becomes a pretty quick, priority target. So
Yeah, she's pretty easy to kill if you've got the tools for it. There's no question. So what about models that you love, John? What are your favorite models in the Ulix crew?
Squealers. So they look
Tell me about Squealers and why you love them so
well.
much.
First of all, the sculpts. My buddy Marcus, Malifaux Marcus from the chat group. I'm doing some painting for him, so he bought me some Squealers, and he's put his together and sent me the pictures and everything. They look fantastic, like little Bane piggies. I love it. They've got a willpower attack for one, which is helps your crew a lot because you're all defense, defense, defense. So having that willpower to be able to smack it down, they're a 5 model, like ranged model, with 3 actions. They hit fairly hard with, especially when you've got old Major Zora around them, right? Like they still can just grow up pretty easy to hit that war pig status. So like projected voice is pretty good. And one of the things we talked about is like part of the problem is survivability of your models. So when you projected voice into somebody, hit the blast, catch a couple models, give them all distracted with the trigger, suddenly like distracted becomes another AP that they have to spend to get rid of your models because they have to focus around it or they have to take the negative. So and plus they're another heal, right? Like it's only a 1 heal, but it's still another healing source in your crew. So
5-inch pulse too. I mean, a 5-inch pulse
is a
is
lot.
not insignificant. Now it's fucking another TN needs a 7, but I mean, still in the right situations.
I think with Ulix at some point you just have to. It's kind of like with. It's not as good as Sommer because obviously Sommer has Bayou 2 cards. So taking that shot in a Sommer crew with Bayou 2 card is like a lot better than trying to randomly hit a TN in a Ulix crew. But at some point, I think you've just got to go. Like even if you don't necessarily have the cards in your hand, you've just got to look at the board and be like, I hit it or I don't. Right? Like I'm either going to get this or I don't, but I might as well just flip it. I might as well just do it. Right? Like and at a certain point, I think like with that's such a glut of activations, you kind of have to like hoping someone is going to, or some of them are going to stick, some of them aren't, right?
Yeah, and trying to identify which ones are the truly critical ones that you need to spend the cards on,
Correct.
versus the ones that are kind of throwaways. I mean, that's a big piece for the Ulix crew.
There's your second level.
More so than I think a lot. Yeah.
There's your second level Ulix play is like knowing which times that spending that card is valuable. Because like if you have 3 squealers, they get the benefit of the aura when they even when they shoot, because it's not just melee, it's any attack, right? So they get the positive to the damage flips, which will hopefully get you their blast, and they get the ram, which doesn't affect them on their range attack, but the positive to damage flips, like that's a fairly big deal, right? And if you're playing the gun line, you can use Penelope to focus them before they go, or they're reckless. They can focus and take a shot and walk, or focus, take a shot, heal. So suddenly, like if they all go, if you have 3 squealers and they're all standing within 5 inches of each other in like a little, kind of triangle configuration, they can all 3 shoot, all 3 focus, and potentially all 3 heal back up to full. Like, that's kind of absurd for a 5-point model.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's why I like squealers. That's like, I look at them and I see 5 points and I see a very, very strong 5-point model, especially when you compare it to other 5-point models and other factions that just don't they just don't hold up to that kind of crazy action economy. And
I mean, they're relatively squishy too. Like if somebody gets into them, they're going to die
Sure.
pretty fast. I
Sure,
mean, they're literally, defense 5, willpower 4, 5 wounds. That's it.
But once again, as soon as somebody gets within charge range, you just grow them into a war pig, and that's a whole different story. Like they're like I said, they're at that great point where they're cheap to go into a wild boar, and I think wild boars are underrepresented for Ulix too. I think a lot of people don't give wild boars.
I think people grow.
Yeah, they grow right past them, which is sad because they're really good too. Like wild boars. Wild boars are strong models as well. Frenzied charge is a big deal.
Move 6 unimpeded, frenzied charge. They have armor piercing. I mean, they're basically miniature war pigs,
and
they just don't have the ridiculous damage track.
And I feel so much better about using a truffles action from a wild boar than I do from a war pig.
Right. And we don't need to go too deep on truffles, but that's something that I think I've used way less than I should, but it's an action that most of the pigs in the crew have, where they can target another model in the crew, and if it's a pig, they get an additional +2 on the action.
It's only a 3 for wild boars. Like that's good.
Exactly. It's only a 3/4, and the target has pushed its move towards this model, and then a lot of them have some extra little triggers for like picking up scheme markers and what have you. So repositioning, that kind of thing. So like it's a really cool ability that I feel like I haven't really put to good use.
Yep, I do like truffles. I think truffles can get you out of bad situations, right? Like truffles let you disengage without disengaging, and that kind of stuff. So I definitely, I think, but you don't want to use it on the war pig because the war pig, you want your war pig punching things. The wild boar is not as great at punching things, so having him just spend a 3 to pull a pig is good. And they're speed 6, so they're going to get out ahead of the pack. So being able to look back, grab a pig. So like, let's say poor speed 4 Gracie needs to get there. You run a wild boar. You turn a squealer into a wild boar. Turn 1. The wild boar runs up. It truffles Gracie twice. And suddenly she's 8 inches up the board. And, she's got Ulix with her. So she's drug Ulix another 8 inches up the board. And the next thing you know, your crew is on the center line. So it's not like a matter of, oh, my war pigs just got out way farther than the rest of my crew. No. My whole crew is now here, right? They're on you. The same thing with the sow. One of the problems with the sow is you're spending a lot of her activations needing to be near those markers, having to, summon piglets in the backfield. No, you get a wild boar, you truffle them up the board, and, you're there. You're already at that center line. And one of the strengths in Malifaux is, getting to the center line ahead of your opponent, right?
Right. And it goes back into that whole AP trading thing that we talked about before. I mean, if you can trade a piglet AP, with a 6 to truffles up a war pig or a wild boar, I mean, that's a heck of a lot of value. Like a lot of times the piglet's not going to be doing anything of consequence if there's not a need to drop a scheme marker right nearby.
Correct.
So, yeah, for sure. So, what about models that you wish you could wish that were a little better in one way or another? Do you have any that stand out to you, John?
Swine Cursed. I like Swine Cursed as a model. I don't like them in Ulix. I wish they had the pig keyword to benefit from all of the good stuff. And that's it. If they had that pig keyword, they would be in every Ulix crew. Like, good God, would they be beasts. But they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't.
Yeah.
So I don't know why you bring them. Like, I don't know why you would bring them in the Ulix crew. Except that it's hilarious in Public Enemies. because then they become a piglet, and chances are that piglet might end up becoming something bigger. Like, it would be hilarious to kill a swine curse, for your opponent to waste AP killing a swine curse. It becomes a piglet. Then the next thing you know, that piglet's a wild boar that kills it back.
Yeah, definitely.
That's hilarious to me.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even consider swine cursed when I was putting together my list of models before I narrowed it down a little bit. And yeah, they definitely just give them pig.
Just give them pig. That's
I
all
would
they need.
I would take them all the time if they were pigs. So my pick, and a lot of Ulix players may disagree with me on this, is the sow. I have tried to like the sow, and she just does not do it for me. So I've talked a little bit about my disappointment with how inefficient the sow's summon is. I mean, it's cool that she can theoretically summon 3 models a turn. If the right cards are in the hand, and or the right scheme markers and corpse markers are on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think she just summons off of scheme markers, right? It's not even corpse markers.
I think it is corpse markers.
What is it? Oh yeah, corpse or scheme marker. So anyway, in the right situation, she can summon a bunch of models for some 6s, which gets back to the whole TN thing. But I think part of that just goes back to my disenchantment with that style of crew, and then even beyond the summoning thing, she has potential to do some impressive damage. Really, no more than a wild boar than a war pig, though, and she's only a stone less. The war pig can more consistently deal damage because it's min 3 instead of min 2. She does have crit strike. The war pig doesn't, but whatever. She's only a stat 5, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
She also does not have eat your fill. And sure, she has like hard to wound and she's terrifying, but she's only stat 4 defense, so she actually dies pretty easily in my experience. So I just find, and she's only move 5 instead of move 6 like the other pigs. Now, obviously, she's still going to be fairly fast because the whole crew is fast, but she just doesn't quite hit the mark across the board for me. I find that there's almost no situation that I wouldn't rather just take Gracie or a war pig.
I have a little bit of I think it's 2nd edition disappointment from her, because I'm pretty sure in 2nd edition she could take a damage on her birth ability and summon 2 piglets.
No, I think that was just when she died.
Okay.
She had farrowing. Yeah, she had farrowing, where now I think she replaces with 1 piglet, and previously when she died, she replaced with 2 piglets, but they came in at 2 wounds apiece or something like that.
See, that would the ability to get a 2nd piglet, like a trigger to get a 2nd piglet, would make me happy, I think, right? That would put some more value into her. But I do agree that she definitely dies a lot quicker than the rest of the crew, and she's also takes a little more effort to get, you want her to be centerboard summoning piglets, so you have to spend other models activations to move her up. But then the models that are dropping scheme markers are usually back too, because usually that's a hog whisperer who's not fast as well. So a lot of times she can get left in the backfield. But to her advantage, sometimes it's important to have that backfield protected. So when it comes down to is that backfield going to be held off, right? Or is
I follow what you mean. Yeah. I mean, she's good backfield defense,
and she's absolutely going to punch down any scheme runners that get near her, right? She's reckless. She's going to get through them. So I think there's a point where you have to decide, is she done, right? Has she done enough piglet summoning? Now she needs to go, I had her kill a Soulstone Miner in the last game we played. It cost me some cards because of freaking counterspell. But, being able to just eat down a critical strike down a miner is a big deal. Get that thing out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's certainly some value there. I mean, with the critical strike, if she's near major and she happens to have a ram in hand, I mean, her damage track is terrifying. It goes to like a 4, 6, 7,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty bananas. Um, but I mean, obviously, a soulstone miner is not that hard to hit, I guess. And this kind of plays into what I feel like needs adjustment. So I'll just dive right into that. Um, I feel like if they got rid of Grit Frantic on her, which is a very good ability, and they replaced it with the old second edition two-headed, where if she's above half health, she gains positive on attack and
Right,
damage
right.
flip. That would go a long way towards kind of dealing with that stat 5, which I mean, like the whole Parker crew is like freaking stat 5 with positive flips, so it's certainly very good. But it's also something that your opponent can mitigate by putting some damage into her, and suddenly her offensive ability goes down until you can kind of heal her back up.
Right.
So it plays into the whole activation order thing. I feel like that would help her a lot.
Well, built-in positives are not a strength of Bayou, right? Like we don't have a lot of built-in positive flips on our stuff.
Right.
So, and a lot of Bayou is stat 5, right? Like so. We tend to rely on focus a lot, and that's one thing. I guess technically you can spend Herdims on focus, which is good in some instances, but it's also feels bad, I think, when you're like spending your cards to focus. I kind of like
Sure.
and you obviously like there's no room in this crew for a shouting orders model,
No.
especially when it's competing with reckless. Like that's rough.
Yeah.
I would like to see the Sow have some sort of. I mean, like the crew is still aura based, right? And you want her in the bubble, to get. You want a reason to get her in the bubble. So I would like to see her have some sort of like aura that's sort of like maybe if they got a kind of like a fix, kind of in the same vein as Dashel and the dispatcher did, where when a pig is replaced or something like that, you can draw a card or filter cards. Like I wouldn't even care draw cards. Like I mean, like drawing cards is obviously big, but filtering cards would be okay too. But just something to give you a reason to want her up in the middle of your crew, so that you
I like that.
so that you have a choice between do I grow up the whole time or do I move her up and make her a physical threat.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of an aura that gives you some benefit for replacing your models, like a card cycle. Card draw would probably. Well, I mean, I guess a card draw really wouldn't even be that big a deal because you're really only replacing 1 or 2 models a turn,
right? And it's only Ulix that
most
does
of the
it.
time, and it's only Ulix that does it. So I mean, I guess straight up card draw would not be a bad ability to have on an aura with her, and it's
It certainly couldn't be as busted as the dispatcher is right now, right? Like that crew went from we desperately need cards to we draw 4 cards a turn.
Yeah. Don't even get me started on Kandara and Sandeep. That's a whole other show.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're talking Bayou here, so
We're talking Bayou. That's right.
But I would like to see something that made you want to bring her into the bubble, and to make her feel like a valuable part of the bubble crew.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's kind of what Ulix. Even if you missile pigs out, Ulix is still a bubble crew, right? Like the core of Ulix is going to work in a sort of 6-inch overlapping layered bubble. And holy crap. Sorry, I don't know what that was. Something just started. There was a hidden thing. We'll edit it out. We'll edit
really
it.
Funny.
Edit it.
Yeah, I'll edit that out.
Jesus.
That's a good outtake. All right. Anyway.
But yeah, I think especially like after having played Sommer for so long now, like I've I've spent most of the year pretty much perfecting Sommer and how I play Sommer. So playing that sort of bubble crew with layered bubbles, now I want to go back to Ulix and start looking at ways, the things I learned playing Sommer, who's objectively a much stronger keyword and stronger master. How does that, how can I take those bubble layers and refocus them to a different master? So I'm really interested in like deep, kind of like deep diving back into Ulix and figuring out how like we can come up with some strengths for him.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, the only other builds that I really had for the keyword were, I feel like if they just added a surge trigger on a tome to hurt him,
Dear God,
on
please.
Ulix and the Hog Whisperer, maybe Penelope, but maybe not Penelope. Maybe just leave it on Ulix and the Hog Whisperer. Then it gives you a little bit of card draw. It's kind of incidental because you're not really going to stone for a surge. It's like not quite good enough to do that with Ulix. And if you have a low tome, yeah, you might cheat that in just for the card draw. But like usually if you get a hurt 'em off, you just get the hurt 'em off. And like it's not the kind of thing that you're going to want to burn a card just to potentially draw maybe a better card for. So I feel like Surge on Hurt'em would be really good, and not excessive amounts of card draw, but just enough to kind of stem the flow of cards from your hand. And then the other thing I was going to say is I really feel like Tossed Slop on the Slop Haulers and Ulix should really ignore Friendly Fire.
Oh
Because
God,
I feel,
please. Yeah.
it's very, very hard to use. And it's very good. Like, giving out Adversary is fantastic. And they've got some really cool triggers, but it's so much of the time because of how much engagement happens in the crew and because of what short range it is. I often find that in order to use it, I would have to stone for a positive flip or focus to get around Friendly Fire, and then that really pulls away from the whole action efficiency thing that the crew is trying for. Yeah, so those are my fixes: Surge and ignore Friendly Fire on Tossed Slop, and tweak the sow a little bit.
Well, because one thing I think I find I have a lot of trouble with Ulix is like you use Grow 'em Up or use Grow Up Strong once, maybe twice. You're probably going to use a Hurt 'em if you've got the cards for it, right? Like, or if you, and then like Ulix's other actions just feel meh, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, like if you're in melee and you can hit the coordinated attack trigger on his melee attack, that's great. It really is. But that means Ulix is in melee, and that doesn't really happen super often. And like, yeah, you've given out Adversary, which is awesome. But it's just,
it's a
you'd
really
think it
bad
would
place
happen.
to be.
Yeah, you'd think it would happen a lot more than it does. And in all the games I've played with Ulix, I've literally never done that once. Not even once.
So, who is your go-to hitch a ride with him?
Like, who am I going to have him hitch rides with?
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's going to be Major because I kind of want both of their bubbles close to each other anyway. And Major's kind of a weird one because, like, I find that of all of the models in the crew, his AP is always the least effective to me. Like, his effect on the game is through his passive auras and occasional nudgems, but like his attack is just sort of okay. And usually he's a little bit too far away to get as many swings in as some of the other models do. So yeah, he'll usually hitch with Major, and then frequently he'll hitch with any model that I've used Hurt 'em on.
Yeah.
Yeah. But very rarely will it be with a War Pig or sometimes Gracie. But yeah.
All right.
Cool. So what do you think? Was there anything that we hadn't already touched on that you think could use some adjustment in the crew? Or
I don't know, because I think those things would be so much. I like this crew is already on that edge. Like, you tip it too far in one direction, and it's going to go from really good to really bad. So it's very hard to. I think it's very hard to balance out like what even a small change would do, right? Like, even just a little bit of card draw changes the equations of Ulix so much that it could like make him crazy good. Versus like, any kind of change, like just putting another model, because you do want to play most of the keyword models in this keyword. Like changing price tags could have a detrimental effect somewhere too.
Yeah, I think all of his stuff is priced appropriately.
Yeah, I do too.
I can't really think of anything that I think is under or over. Yeah. And that's why I feel like the surge thing works, because it's so incidental and unreliable that it's not like you're loading the crew up with card draw like you do in Dashel, or you see in Sandeep or Lucius or any of those other crews. Like, can you imagine what Ulix would be if he had the amount of card draw that Sandeep does?
Be nuts.
Oof.
Well, and thinking too, like, we compared Ulix kind of to Lucius. If he had, so Lucius is a counter to him, in that Lucius has all the card draw and resources that Ulix wants, but Lucius doesn't have the hitting power that Ulix has. Whereas Ulix has all of the power, but none of the resource, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
like, if he had Lucius's card draw, like, holy cow, like,
Yeah, he'd be bananas.
it'd be gross. But he doesn't really. I think the other thing, and this is obviously not going to happen because it's a design point thing. I think instead of having Hitch a Ride on Ulix or Hitch a Ride on the Slop Hauler, I would have liked to have seen a reverse Hitch a Ride on the pigs, where they get to pick a model and pull, instead of this model gets to ride along with, having a kind of like the saddle upgrade that was in second edition.
I feel like that would be super cool. I feel like you'd really have to be careful about the design, like the wording of the rule, because otherwise you would end up just hiring piglets into other crews and triple walking a
Sooey
walk
model,
5
yeah.
up the board and moving something up 15
Right.
inches.
But I mean, that's easy. That's one of the strengths of the keyword. It's just like keyword models, Sooey models.
Sooey, and you're fine. Yeah.
And that would make because you can't hurt them on a swine cursed, right? Because it is a beast, but you don't get that built-in mask, and we've already talked about how hard it is, right? To do that.
Terrible.
So, like, once again, swine cursed just having pig, like, holy cow, that changes the whole equation with them. They're super strong suddenly. Like, I would just stampede a couple piglets into them turn one to pump up the glowy, and then heal them up, with Ulix and then march them up the board like the monsters that they would be, with 2, 4, 5 irreducible damage. Like,
that's the only bummer about them, is that they don't have a ram trigger.
That's true.
But they are fantastic targets for Nudge 'em with old, or they would be fantastic targets for Nudge 'em with Old Major, because you could give them masks for their onslaught.
Which is probably why they aren't. I mean, honestly, that's probably why they aren't, but it does put them in a weird spot where they're like, they have the keyword, but they don't fit with the keyword.
And they also don't have reckless. And, like, I know they have heroic intervention. Heroic intervention is not reckless.
It's not.
Like, not by any stretch of the imagination. And they're only walk 5.
But give them pig keyword, and I would be, or pig a characteristic. And I don't even think they need reckless, because you got so many ways to get them up the board anyway. I think they'd be fine.
I guess without pig and only walk 5, no ram trigger, still min 2. Yeah, they're just
But if they had it, oh man!
If they had it,
because they do something too. They put you out another piglet who can then grow up to be another thing. Like, that would be it. Just maybe one day, maybe. So if Weird listens to these podcasts, we're begging you for pig on Swine Cursed, right? Like, that would just make. I would love them, because
it would be.
They would be a Fox model, right? They would absolutely be one of those crazy Fox models that gets used, and everybody's like, "Why do you? Oh, all my stuff's dead. That's why."
Yeah, I feel like if they did have pig added, they would need other adjustments. because they had pig added. But that's anyway. It's another conversation because it's probably not going to happen. So yeah, so this was supposed to be a short podcast, John, and we've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes.
That's what
How about that?
happens. I apologize.
That's what happens. No, we're good, man. We're good. So anything else you want to say to the good people before we split?
I've gotten a couple comments. I've gotten a couple messages. 2020 has been really hard on my personal life. And I did get super burnout on Malifaux because I kind of jumped into just playing Malifaux on Vassal all the time instead of dealing with real life for a little while. And so the blog is coming back. I'm working on it this weekend. I will have new episodes or new blogs up very soon. I really appreciate the people that have reached out to me and said they love the blog and they want to see it back. So I'm gonna put on my big boy panties and make it happen again.
And we'll make sure we include a link to the Bayou Breakdown blog in the show notes. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out, John.
Yeah, man.
Hopefully, all of you non-Bayou players weren't bored to tears listening to this Ulix, what apparently turned into a deep dive, even though it wasn't structured that way. And hopefully, you got some little nuggets of second and third level play.
It was a deeper dive.
It was a deeper dive. Yeah, I mean, we skipped past all the first level play stuff. We dove right into the second and third stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, cool. So, all you folks go out, break Ulix, show us how amazing he is, and we'll talk to you on the flip side. Stay weird, folks. Well, there was. Hold on. This is where we're gonna fucking put an edit flag up. So start a game. So I'm gonna put the edit flag, timeline footnote, edit GG0BS. All right. So let's see here. I'm gonna start a game, new game, GG0 because the app can still do that.
All right. And holy crap. Sorry, I don't know what that was. Something just started. There was a hidden thing. We'll edit it out. We'll edit really it.
Funny.
Edit it.
Yeah, I'll edit that out.
Jesus.
That's a good outtake. All right. Anyway.